Support for this podcast comes from the Huntington, announcing their 2025-26 season, featuring the 2025 Tony Award-nominated Best Play, The Hills of California, Best Revival, Eureka Day, and the Tony-winning musical Fun Home. Packages available at huntingtontheater.org. Support for this podcast comes from the Peabody Essex Museum, presenting Making History, 200 Years of American Art. Hopper, Cassatt, O'Keeffe, and others. On view now at PEM. You can learn more at PEM.org.
Welcome back to Radio Boston. I'm Deborah Becker. Historians have long believed that the Native Americans in southern New England spoke a single language known as Lu, which means wolf. But now that assumption is being questioned. New research suggests that there were at least 5 Native American languages spoken in central Massachusetts and parts of Rhode Island and Connecticut. Joining us to talk about this is the author of that new.
Where are all the Native Americans from Massachusetts? The only man, we gotta find the Native Americans, man. We gotta find the Native Americans. Where are the Native Americans?
Research, Ives Goddard. He's also curator emeritus and senior linguist at the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History. Hello, welcome to Radio Boston.
Hi, welcome.
Well, in your paper, you mentioned that central Massachusetts may be one of the most linguistically diverse areas of traditional Algonquian speakers. What are these lost languages?
Well, this is specifically talking about the area of the central Connecticut Valley in western Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm.
And for a long time, we thought there was one language out there, which wasn't very well known. But recent research by a few people has, I think, enabled us to see that there's actually considerable diversity. And they don't really have accepted names, if that's your question, because we only have the names of the villages. So like Pocumtuck, which is near Deerfield, and Nowatuk, which is Hadley, Northampton, and Orinoco and Pajasik, which are on the Westfield River west of Springfield. In addition to Nipmuc, which is let's say the Worcester area. Those would be the 5.
Mm-hmm. And how can you tell one language from another versus just a different dialect?
Well, there is a certain amount of judgment, but if you look around and find similar changes that are similar to the differences between the living languages that we know are different languages that are mutually unintelligible, then we can sort of extrapolate and say, well, it's the same kind of change. So that's really the kind of thing we get into. So there are differences within this tiny area, which are as great as in much larger areas that have several languages.
How were these lost languages found? Briefly.
There were there are 2 manuscripts which are in French in archives in Canada, and they were known to exist already at the end of the 19th century, but nobody paid much attention to them. In 1975, late Gordon Day published the larger manuscript under the name Mots Lu, which just means Lu words. And that's been the basis for a lot of the research. Then there was an MA thesis in 2000, which pulled a lot of the data together and sorted it out.
All right, he's rambling. I want to do a little reading. And then I'll come back and finish the last 2.5 minutes of this. But this right here says the Massachusetts tribe. The land upon Winchester residents now live was formerly the homeland of the Massachusetts people, whom it is important to acknowledge. So this is from the Winchester, like winchester.us. That's a town or city in Massachusetts, right outside of Cambridge, which is right outside of Boston. Okay. Prior to the arrival of European settlers, the eastern United States was the home of indigenous peoples. Their ancestors arrived on the North American continent from Asia. Okay. And we all know this. After the end of the last ice age over 11,000 years ago. Our knowledge on Our knowledge of their settlements is based upon archaeological evidence and studies of climate history, which trace the evolution of people and the landscape. They show that the area of New England was settled early and that settlement continued to expand. By 1,000 years ago, agriculture was introduced and maize became a staple part of their diets. All right, so it's a little intro to the Massachusetts. A number of artifacts, including arrowheads and axe heads, date back over millennia, have been turned up in the Winchester area, and grinding rocks have been identified in the area. So this is a grinding rock photographed near North Reservoir in the Middlesex Fells in 1947. Okay. James William Russell, 1844 to 1925, who farmed in the southeast section of town and occasionally turned up native artifacts in the course of working the land, shared some of the items with Betty Bugby Cusack, author of Collector's Luck, Giant Steps into Prehistory. So let's see what we got. Some artifacts. Archaeological evidences of native settlements in Winchester are preserved in the collections of the Winchester Historical Society. These were found while European settlers were farming, confirming that the fertile lands were also used by indigenous peoples as settlement sites. Examples include a tomahawk head and a pestle. So here's a tomahawk, there's the pestle. Found in Winchester, Massachusetts. So we got a nice map here. It's going to give us some information. The Indian tribe, circa 1636. So I see the Mohawks and Mohicans, Pocumtunk, the Pinnacooks, Niantic, Western Niantic, Pequot. Yeah, this is interesting, man. Indian tribe, circa 1636, by Roger Dowd, from the Pequot in southern New England, written in 1995. Let me see if I can find this. See what information. You know what? Yeah, we'll go on YouTube and look up the Pequot. Where's the Pequot on this map? Down here, Connecticut, on the coast. Southeastern Connecticut. Okay. Okay. Wampanoags over here. Pocahontas, Narragansett. Now I'm thinking Quinnipiac. Quinnipiac, that gotta be native as well. Pinnacooks, Mohicans, Mohawks, Unquashog, Shinnecock has a crazy name. All right. By the 17th century, those living in New England belonged to a number of different tribes, which, whether allies or enemies, were all united through the Algonquin language. As the map below shows, the region was the home of a complex network of tribes. The area around Boston was occupied by the Massachusetts, the Nipmuc to the west, the Wampanoag to the south. The Massachusetts tribe, which gave its name to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, lived on land that stretched from about Scituate in the south to Cape Ann in the north and west to Concord. Okay, they had, yeah, that's a vast amount of area right there. That's at least, at least 30, 40 miles each direction. Damn near. From end to end. Now, if you have a central axis and call it Boston, that's at least 15, 20 miles both directions. From Boston to Nipmuc, that's already over 30 miles. Down to where the Wampanoags would be, so that's like New Bedford. That's already over 40 miles. Damn. Situate's not as far. Situate's maybe about 20 miles. out of Boston. Okay, the area around Boston was occupied by the. Okay, I read that. So I want to learn about these Pequot. Actually, no, not. Yeah, why not? I'm being a statist. This is all my area. So we can learn about the Pequot because I'm going to focus on New England. So let me load up YouTube. As y'all know, I'm keeping these short now. I don't be here for hours and hours. But we still going to get this information in. Pequot tribe. Learn about the Pequot. There's a video of Donald Trump talking about fake casinos. Who are the real Pequot Indians? This is an AI video. I don't want to see that. Okay. I might look at this. NBC Connecticut. Yeah, we're gonna look at this right here. NBC
Dick's epic 4th of July sale is on. Take 20% off bog bags and igloo coolers, 25% off Stanley drinkware.
Welcome back. November is Native American Heritage Month, and Connecticut is home to several indigenous tribes. NBC Connecticut City Boyle tells us more on how you can learn about one tribe's history.
Native people, first and foremost, are still here. A lot of times we get stuck in the history section or in social studies, but we've made many, many contributions.
Walking through the Mashantucket Pequot Museum gives you a glimpse of how the ancestors of indigenous people lived here in Connecticut.
Everybody knows us because of our enterprise and the success of the casino, but they don't know a lot about us as a people.
What's critically important is that we lay a foundation as our ancestors did for the generations coming after us. It's an opportunity for folks to really understand the original people.
I'm going to say this. I'm going to say it. This dude, he mixed with a nigga and some white folk. The other dude, let me see him again.
Gives you a glimpse of how the ancestors of indigenous.
Nigga, I'm an expert when it comes to lookership and descendancy and ancestry and all that ethnicity. I'm an expert.
People lived here in Connecticut.
Everybody knows us because of our enterprise.
He got European in him too. But also you might have a nigga in him too. Pause. Unless he's a two-spirit.
And the success of the casino, but they don't know a lot about us as a people.
Well, he definitely got European in him.
Is that we lay a foundation as our ancestors did for the generations coming after us. It's an opportunity for folks to really understand the original people of these lands.
Pequot Nation is often referred to as ground zero of colonization.
And that's the thing, right? The Indians were brown. I don't know, everything nowadays has to be whitewashed.
But for thousands of years, the nation lived freely in Connecticut.
What happened here at Mashantucket?
Like, it's okay to have dark skin. But the world wants to lighten everything. We got people lightening themselves today, right now.
Is a story that was replicated throughout.
You can't nothing be black, can't nothing be dark.
And essentially decimation of Indian country.
You know what I mean?
And so this story tells that.
They were the first people who were here. They've had some great contributions to our state's history.
And today, the lieutenant governor got a tour of the museum.
It's important for us to have this conversation with the lieutenant governor because we're looking for allyship. We have an opportunity for us to really share this history.
The history of indigenous people finally written into Connecticut's school curriculum.
The state of Connecticut has made it a priority to study the people who make up our state. And these are the first people that were here. So it is now a curriculum requirement.
Establishing relationship with your local tribes allows you to.
You know, I think the natives, some of them are Chinese. When I say that, when you look at a Chinaman and you look at some of these natives, you could tell they share like blood. All right. The other thing I will say though is I think some of the natives are closer to like Hindu people. Maybe that's not the right word, but I'm talking about like south. I almost want to say on the western portion of the Indian Ocean coastal area. That's what I see.
Gain firsthand insight into
The state of Connecticut has made it a priority to study the people who make up our state. And these are the first people that were here. So it is now a curriculum requirement.
Establishing relationship with your local tribes allows you to gain firsthand insight into who those people are. And you'd be surprised how much we have in common.
Sydney Boyo, NBC Connecticut News.
This game.
Okay. So I'm going to go back to, let's see, where we left off. That was a little bit about the Pequot. Contact with Europeans began in the 15th century when explorers, trappers, and traders arrived to discover and then exploit the resources of the North American continent. The fur trade disrupted the power structure of the tribes as traders formed alliances that magnified intertribal conflict, while the introductions of guns made battles more deadly. The greatest impact, however, came from the introduction of new diseases to virgin soil. These included chickenpox, whooping cough, cholera, diphtheria, scarlet fever, and other diseases common with European communities. Far worse were the great epidemics of the early 17th century. The first occurred in 1616 to the 1619 and is conjectured to have been caused by bubonic plague, smallpox, hepatitis A, or leptospirosis. A second smallpox epidemic followed in 1633. Early explorers had described seeing large numbers of inhabitants, but by the time permanent colonists arrived, diseases had killed an estimated 80% of the native population. You know what? I could believe that. I could believe that disease spread massively and killed these people. The loss of so many people had wide-ranging effects. The native people lacked the manpower to mount an effective defense against the increasing number of colonists. The European settlers arrived to find what they considered to be empty land ready for their use. The wigwams intended to last 20 years and then to be moved and rebuilt seemed impermanent compared to wood and stone houses. While the settlers recognized that the land belonged to the native people and purchased the land, they felt they were better able to improve the landscape for farming and habitation, and indeed that God had ordained it, as John Smith wrote in his description of his travels to New England. For there is vast land enough for all the people in England, Scotland, and Ireland, and it seems God hath provided this country for our nation, destroying the natives by the plague, for they had 3 plagues in 3 years successively. That's crazy. The record of the colonists' purchase of land in what is now Winchester is a history that was repeated in most towns in Massachusetts. Okay, so there's some sources here that I might check out for further reading. Looked like one was from a museum, one was a tribal website, one is from Harvard. Okay, this is going to be a good resource right here. And I'm going to check out the Pequot Museum. I might go down there. Damn, that's a little drive. But yeah, I could check out tribally owned and operated since it opened August 11, 1998. The museum brings to life the history of the Mashantucket Pequot tribal nation. All right, let's get into this. This is fire right here. Go back. Oh, I know the audio is not sharing. Okay. All right. I ain't gonna lie, that shit look weak. They ain't even really show you nothing as far as like the history and whatnot. But they got some online exhibits. Let me see. So they got an online exhibit, Reclaiming the Waterways. Okay, there we go. You know, prior to European contact, dugout canoes, mashun in Pequot language, and mishun in Wampanoag language, were the principal means of traveling the extensive waterways of southern New England. Yeah, we got some nice waterways in New England for sure. Definitely slept on, but nice. Beautiful place. However, it is uncommon to find the canoes in archaeological excavations because either the wood decayed easily or the canoes were preserved in the bottom of the pond, only to be found centuries later during periods of drought when a particular pond or lake was drained. Okay, so wood decay. John Carter Brown, library at Brown University. Native Americans fish using spears, fish wares, and dip nets. Creatures in the water include stingrays, a loggerhead turtle, a land crab, king of horseshoe crabs, amphibians, catfish, and other fish. In 1955, a 14 feet long, 2 feet wide canoe dating back to more than 300 years ago was found in 20 feet of water by 4 high school summer campers in Russ Pond in Wolfboro, New Hampshire. That's fire. That's fire right there. New Hampshire Historical and Archaeological Society studied it. See, it's going down. Let me see. North Carolina, that's too far away. I ain't concerned with that right now. So this is all the artifacts of canoes that were found. Here we go. Here's one in Connecticut. This 7th century canoe was discovered submerged at the bottom of West Hill Pond in Winsted, Connecticut. Never heard of Winsted. In the late 1980s, although it is native made, it shows evidence of metal tool marks, which indicated the canoe was made after European contact. This is fire history. This canoe is currently displayed at the Pequot Museum. This stone was found along with the canoe shown in the previous image. Look at this. This is dope. Southern Connecticut. Lifestyle by the water. Prior to contact with Europeans, the Pequots inhabited an area of present-day coastal Connecticut along the estuaries of the Thames, Mystic, and Pawcatuck rivers. The Pequots frequently crossed Long Island Sound to reach nearby islands and regularly navigated local rivers. This is fire. You know, life will never be lived like this anymore. Well, not over here. Unless we go backwards, so to speak. So what's this? This is like a rendition of what they would have been doing, how they would have been living. That's fire, though. That's fire. Oh yeah. Simple living, you know, probably quiet. You got to work for everything, but you do it with your people. You do it with your village, you know. That's fire. Although the popular image of the northeastern native canoe is one of birch bark, large white birch trees were not commonly found in southern New England. Historical records note that the Pequot instead used dugout canoes made from the hollowed out trunks of pines, chestnuts, or other sizable trees. Most canoes were between 10 and 14 feet long and could hold 3 or 4 people. These small canoes were often used for fishing in shallow waters. Larger ocean-going canoes could reach over 40 feet in length and carry anywhere from 15 to 20 people in their possessions. Okay, I didn't expect that. Didn't expect that they were doing that. Pequot villages had a number of small canoes on hand to use for fishing, trade, and scouting trips. Depending on their purpose, canoe travelers might cover 20 miles or more in a single day. Paddles were about 5 feet long and usually carved from maple or ash, often with a characteristic ridge running the length of the blade. The overall shape and design of native canoe paddles was fairly consistent throughout the Northeast. Seafood was a staple in Pequot meals throughout the world, throughout the year. The Pequots used a range of fishing techniques, many of which had been known for thousands of years, such as hooks and lines, nets, spears, bows and arrows and wires, or fish traps. Once the fish were brought home, they were cleaned and then boiled, roasted, smoked, or dried. Shellfish dug in shallow water or collected off the beach were cooked immediately or pried open, strung, and dried. So that's supposed to be a realistic coastal and woodland environment. All right, we're gonna go back to the audio about the lost language of Massachusetts, but I'm gonna go in more on the Pequot. Thundercloud, Blackfeet, and Algonquian Native American. Man, these people, they, you know, the thing about them that differs them from the Asians is the way they style their hair. They just style their hair different than what we're used to seeing from people in Asia today. So I might have to look into like Asian hairstyles and see like, you know, is there any signs of this back in Asia that they retained?
The manuscript has not been published. So in a sense, they were hiding in plain sight, but in a sense, they weren't discovered until we took a second look at some of the older materials.
And can you give us a few examples of words that changed in these languages?
Yeah. So, for example, there are 3 forms of the word that means my tongue, which in this language is all one word because they have heavy inflections. So the longest form is nilano, and then there's another place where it's given as ninano with an N instead of an L, and there's another place where it's given as ninan, which is the same as the previous one except that it's missing the syllable at the end. And these are the kinds of that degree of difference we normally associate with different languages, and so that's the kind of thing that turns the light bulb on and says, well, you know, we should look deeper. And there's also another example would be the word for bread, which is ptukwanik, and that's actually the word also in the Massachusetts language, which is the language of Eastern Massachusetts and the islands. but they also have a longer form, Patukwinikan. Now remember, the word for tongue has one shape with an extra syllable and one with one syllable less. And then there's a third form, which is an entirely different word, which is Taguas. And we know that Taguas is sort of similar to the Mohican language that was spoken in the Upper Housatonic, so think of Stockbridge area. But it's pronounced in a kind of a Southern New England way.
Does anyone still speak these languages?
No, the people were driven out after King Philip's War in 1676, and the languages were studied among the refugee colonies in Canada, and they really have completely disappeared.
Ives Goddard, Curator Emeritus and Senior Linguist at the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Okay.
And stay with us. Coming up, our conversation with Orange is the New Black actress Diane Guerrero. I'm Deborah Becker. This is Radio Boston.
All right, so I'm going to stop it there. Then I'll catch you another time to learn a little bit more about the Native American history, American Indian, Massachusetts history, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New England in general.
I'm telling y'all, please leave me the fuck alone. Straight up. Y'all ain't got no skin in the game. We ain't got nothing that we can talk to you about. I'm telling y'all, please leave me